and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the 10th overall entry into the Halloween movie franchise, the 2009 slasher Halloween 2, the second movie in the overall franchise to date to bear the same name, and indeed for me, the second of 4 remaining movies in the series I had still yet to see for the first time. This follow-up, directed once again by Rob Zombie, after having directed the last movie in the series, 2007's Halloween, it itself a reboot of the franchise and a more gritty, gruesome retelling of the original 1978 classic Halloween, as directed by John Carpenter, continues the new Halloween timeline set up in Zombie's first movie, continuing the chapter in terror and twisting more of the lore and established characters to further fit Zombie's, in this case, somewhat unique vision for the franchise. Following the events of the last movie, we now catch up with the series' main protagonist, Laurie Strode, as played once again by Scout Taylor-Compton, a year later now living with one of her best friends, Annie Brackett, as once again played by Danielle Harris, and Annie's father, Sheriff Lee Brackett, as played by Brad Dourif. After both survived the horrific Halloween night, survived the last year's Halloween night, when notorious serial killer Michael Myers, as played by Tyler Mane, broke free from the institution where he was being held and went on a murderous rampage around the sleepy suburb of Haddonfield, killing many of Laurie and Annie's friends and family in the process. This time around, the focus is on Laurie, who has hit rock bottom since Michael's last attack, and new revelations threaten to spiral her mental state out of control. Lashing out at her friends, the world, and everything else in between, Laurie struggles to come to terms with the events that transpired a year ago and cannot reconcile how to move on with her life. Not that any of this is actually, of course, unfounded. Michael's body was never recovered, and as soon as we learn, Michael is well and truly alive and kicking, and looking to finish his mission to reunite with Laurie, mercilessly killing all that look to stand in his way. And so we set to yet another gut-wrenching Halloween night as Michael plays his next hand in yet another terrifying chapter in Haddonfield's history, and as Laurie and her friends give the fight of their lives. Now, after catching up with Rob Zombie's first incarnation of Michael Myers for the first time as part of this review series and thoroughly enjoying his take on the Masked Menace, I was actually beyond excited to see where he planned to take the series and its iconic characters next. Unfortunately, my excitement was a bit short-lived. What really started out as a strong and violent beginning, bringing us a more ruthless and indeed well-choreographed version of the original Halloween sequel, 1981's Halloween 2, this quickly gave way to a meandering plot that lacked any sense of urgency or oomph, becoming ever more weighted into its own sense of being, and its messy direction examined a new potentially shared mental connection between Laurie and Michael. Unlike Zombie's first outing, this entry is less honest. It relies on a number of cheap tricks to fool the audience, which themselves would be okay given the context he was going for, but the kicker is the fact that these particular sequences are far better than anything we have in the main bulk of the movie. It's a gory movie, sure, no complaints from me there, but this time around this feels like gore for gore's sake, and much is positively surreal to say the least. Michael has apparently been having visions of his mother, as played by Sheri Moon Zombie, and a horse, for some reason, and it is these that we are now led to believe are his driving force to kill. But for me personally, they feel like some kind of acid trip most of the time, always present, distracting, and deterring away from the actual horror unfolding on screen. Michael's mostly just wandering around the US for the most part, Much of this movie, he could have been any old random vagrant. When he's actually been Michael, he's excellent, more brutal than we've ever seen. But these moments are fleeting. Most of the time, he's not even wearing his mask. It hardly feels like a Halloween movie at all. It strays that far from the series narrative that whilst I appreciate the different slant Zombie was actually trying to add to the franchise, this just turned out all kinds of wrong. A bit up its own... It's warped, cringy, trash, and totally trashy to boot. Needlessly crass at times. Some of the humour is totally off. Positively vulgar at times, and every other word's the F-bomb. The movie is completely saturated with this, more so than an Eddie Murphy special. In fact, some characters don't have that much more of anything else to really say. The movie free falls too far. Without Carpenter's original framework, Zombie fails to rein things in, instead bringing us a complete melting pot of ideas, that whilst some may have worked on their own merits, collectively, the resultant film is a complete mess and nowhere near as grounded as his original attempt. That indeed had some founded integrity, and although this is more of an original kind of works, if you like, it simply fails to be coherent enough to justify its bloated runtime. Completely overindulgent and totally missing the point. There's buckets of blood, sure. I ain't complaining about that, like I said. It's a ruthless movie, and Michael's power is certainly on full display when he does eventually set forth. I just think the trips into his psyche were completely over-embellished and resulted in quite a destructive story. The film also messes with the characters that were set up so brilliantly in Zombie's first outing. The character dynamic is nowhere near as fluid. Laurie is now a moody delinquent into grunge and Alice Cooper, as you do. The whole world now set upon her. But where this should have been a more powerful story about the anguish and turmoil inflicted on a victim well after such an ordeal has transpired, Taylor-Compton unfortunately just came off as irritating and whiny, giving one of the poorest and strained portrayals of Laurie Strode the series has kind of seen to date. A complete diversion from the emphasis she gave the character in the first movie. Dr. Samuel Loomis, as once again played by Malcolm McDowell, has been reduced to a fame-grabbing tool whose inclusion in the movie seems somewhat superfluous. He has little at all to do with the overarching plot in any way, spending much of his time on the conference circuit discussing his new book, and we have to sit and watch. Apparently this is the new Loomis. I think McDowell actually plays the part well, even though I don't necessarily like the direction they took for the character. That, and it's just not one of the movie, it's just, his character's just not one the movie chooses to use to any great relative effect. However, the movie does do justice to both of the brackets, Annie and Sheriff Lee. Both are played brilliantly with the emotion each deserved at the point of their own character's arc, and the way that each develops over the course of the film, you know? Danielle Harris in particular brings Annie back with much more decorum and honesty than portrayed in the first movie. And indeed, she does have some of the film's more poignant and heartfelt moments. The one true anchor the movie really has, and I don't mind saying I was, in the end, quite smitten with the character all told. Mostly, for me, there was no real musical hook like we've had in all the previous installments, whether based on Carpenter's original theme or not. The lack of any real kind of musical definition was certainly felt, and although Tyler Bates' score worked for the most part, it battled against Zombie's direction, I found, and it still felt devoid of any kind of real commitment or individuality that could be used to define the movie on a musical level. Overall, given the energy, the style and dedication that we had with, Zombie had with his original directorial outing within the Halloween franchise, this movie seemed like a complete U-turn and a disregard of anything he had built using Carpenter's original framework. Gory and as brutal as the movie was, it just never really felt like a Halloween movie. It was hard to really kind of grasp at times just exactly what it was getting at. Totally over-embellished into its own sense of being. Most of the time we were in and out of dreams and visions, which gets tedious, and Michael is certainly taking the trip back home at his leisure, making everything unnecessarily long and convoluted. Tediously so. This is not an easy watch by any stretch. It tries to set itself apart, offers something unique. It deserves a couple of points for that. But most of the time it's absolutely crass, lewd, trashy, and simply pointless. A case of too much, really, that in the end ends up being just too little. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you at SciFirst MovieTalk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.